Well, for more, let's bring in David Livingston, Deputy Director of Climate and Advanced Energy at the Atlantic Council. He joins us from Miami. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rachelle.
So let's start with an overview. What's been the global impact so far of the Paris Agreement?
The overall impact has been obviously significant, but with some uncertainty over it, due to the U.S.'s intended withdrawal. The most significant impact that the Paris Agreement had when it came into force was the fact that it had broken down this years-long, even decades-long division between developed and developing countries that for many years had stymied a global agreement on climate change. This was its most significant contribution. It was bottom-up rather than top-down, and it was voluntary rather than binding. Although what made it effective was the peer pressure of having all the major economies in. With the U.S. potentially leaving at the earliest November of 2020, it calls into question exactly how much pressure some of the more laggard nations might feel to continue to follow through on their Paris commitments.
Now, despite the U.S. pulling out, we're seeing obviously more action at the state level. The governors of California, New York, and Washington in a USA Today op-ed, they said that they're still going to do what they can as state leaders, but said that they can't meet the climate change challenge without the federal government. So what can be done to offset the lack of participation from the U.S. government?
Well, these groups are all doing a terrific job, and the attention that they're getting is deserved. You've got groups like the Climate Mayors, a group of mayors, the U.S. Climate Alliance. You just mentioned in the video intro here is a group of different governors. You've got We're Still In and these different business groups. The challenge that they're going to have, they're all taking significant actions. And in a sense, we're probably getting more climate action at the subnational level, or at least more commitments at the subnational level than we would have gotten had President Trump not announced withdrawal from Paris. The challenge, of course, is going to be taking all these different commitments, this mosaic of unequal commitments from various different levels of governance, and trying to tie them together, first of all, to quantify what they all add up to, and whether that comes close to still meeting the U.S. commitment under its initial Paris pledge, as well as trying to determine how are these groups going to be held accountable for following through on what they say they want to do. And here is where the symbolism of being in or out of Paris actually probably takes second fiddle to concrete actions, concrete decarbonization commitments, and most importantly, concrete commitments to innovation and to deploying technology on the part of cities, states, and corporations.
Now, we have seen that the U.S. withdrawal seems to have galvanized other countries' commitment to the accord. How do you think other signatories will move forward with this accord?
Well, I think it's a double story. We're getting a lot of rhetoric that shows a lot of solidarity and shows that countries and the global community is going to move forward regardless of what the U.S. does. But I would say that behind the curtain, behind that rhetoric, I'm concerned, and I know a number of other climate negotiators are concerned, that when we get to 2020, which is obviously when the United States would first be able to leave the Paris Agreement officially, but also when countries around the world are on the hook for taking stock of their initial pledges that they made in 2015, 2016, and potentially increasing their ambition, that when that time comes, if it is clear that the United States will be leaving the agreement, the peer pressure to increase their pledges, to increase ambition, and to show that they're following through might not be there. Right. We already see some fissures developing, I would mention. Last month, there was, at the latest round of climate negotiations on the implementation of the Paris Agreement, there's still a number of complicated issues to work out. It appeared that China was starting to backslide or revert back to old negotiating positions that the global community thought it had moved past. And as a result, we're getting slower progress towards implementing Paris than we thought before. So there's a double-edged sword here in terms of the rebound effect of positive rhetoric, but behind the curtain, some backsliding that is unfortunate and dangerous if the United States does withdraw from the Paris Agreement.
Now, David, it's interesting because one of the tricky aspects of the accord is that as governments change leadership, as we saw in the U.S., there is the potential for some allegiances to the accord to change with that. So just how sustainable is the Paris Accord?
It's sustainable so long as the major economies of the world are committed to it, I would argue. At the end of the day, it was those major economies, the EU, China, India, and the United States, which ended up making the deal happen in Paris back in December of 2015. It will be those countries that determine its future. The United States, it should be noted, could rejoin within 30 days of the next president. Let's say if there is a change in administration after President Trump's first term, if that president on the day of their inauguration chose to re-enter the Paris Agreement, they could signal their willingness to do so, and
Right.
within 30 days the United States could return. But the question is, will the EU, will India, will China be able to figure out some sort of tacit agreement on carrying forward momentum in the absence of the United States?
We'll certainly have to wait and see. Thank you so much, David Livingston with the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council.